You gave away what?
The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting a faint glow over the quiet streets. A flickering neon, open, sign hummed in the window of a small convenience store, its dull buzz blending into the distant sound of passing traffic. Claire, 25-year-old waitress, hurried down the sidewalk, her apron still tied around her waist. Another long shift at the diner had left her feet aching and her head pounding, but at least she was one step closer to covering rent. As she reached the street corner, she noticed a figure sitting on the cold pavement. An elderly man sat hunched over, wrapped in layers of worn-out clothing. His hands trembled slightly from the cold, and deep lines of age and hardship marked his face. There was something in his expression, an emptiness, that made Claire's stomach twist. Then she saw it, a faded army insignia stitched onto his tattered coat. She hesitated. Veterans held a special place in her heart. Her grandfather had been one. He had told her stories of bravery, brotherhood, of soldiers who risked everything for their country. But he had also spoken of the ones who came home, only to be forgotten. Claire swallowed hard and turned toward the store, not wanting to stare. "This is after insurance." The voice was firm but tired, edged with quiet frustration. Claire looked up. The man now stood at the pharmacy counter, gripping a crumpled prescription in his weathered hands. The pharmacist, a young woman in a crisp white coat, sighed sympathetically. "Yes, sir. Your insurance covered part of it, but the remaining balance is $22. The veteran exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't have that kind of money. Not right now." Claire watched as he pulled out his wallet and sifted through a small stack of bills, creased, worn, barely holding together. He counted carefully before laying $200 on the counter. "This is all I've got," he said. "Is there anything you can do?" The pharmacist shook her head regretfully. "I wish I could help, but that's the lowest price after insurance." A long silence stretched between them. The old man clenched his jaw, then slowly tucked the cash back into his wallet, his fingers lingering on the edges of the bills as if they were his last thread of hope before it unraveled. Claire's heart pounded. He needed that medicine. She had no idea what condition he had, but the desperation in his voice, the weight in his shoulders, it was clear this wasn't just about medication. This was survival. No one else in the store seemed to care. A few customers glanced in his direction before quickly looking away. They saw, but they didn't see. The veteran let out a heavy breath, stepping back from the counter. "I need this medicine," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His voice wavered. "I served 25 years so others wouldn't have to. Never thought it'd be this hard just to get what I need to live." Claire gripped the strap of her bag, fingers pressing into the worn leather. She glanced at her phone screen. Her bank balance, $1,047. Just enough for rent. She had worked double shifts, skipped meals, and scraped by to make sure she wouldn't fall behind. $1,000. That's all it would take to change this man's life. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She could walk away. No one would judge her for it. She had her own struggles, her own problems. But what if she didn't? What if this was her moment to do something that actually mattered? She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Then, before she could overthink it, she stepped forward. She had made her decision. But was it the right one? The veteran had already turned toward the door, his shoulders hunched under the weight of disappointment. His boots shuffled against the cold tile floor, each step slow, reluctant, like a man who had learned long ago that life rarely showed mercy. Claire couldn't let him leave. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward, grabbing his hand and pressing a folded stack of bills into his palm. "Here," she whispered. The veteran froze. His fingers instinctively curled around the money, but his body remained rigid. Slowly, he turned to look at her, confusion flickering across his face. "What is this?" His voice was rough, tired. Claire swallowed hard. She knew exactly what this was. "It's for your medicine," she said, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. The veteran's gaze dropped to the cash in his hand. He hesitated, then carefully unfolded the bills. His breath caught. "No," he said immediately, shaking his head. I can't accept this." Claire stood firm. "Yes, you can," she replied. "And you will." The veteran's lips parted slightly, but no words came. His weathered face, lined with years of hardship, softened in disbelief. "This is $1,000, he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "I know. But you don't even know me." Claire exhaled slowly. "I don't have to." The store had gone silent. A woman near the canned goods aisle had paused mid-reach, watching. The cashier, who had been lazily scanning items, froze, and hovering over the register. A young man in a baseball cap, sitting near the pharmacy, quietly raised his phone. He was recording. The moment stretched between them, fragile yet unbreakable. The veteran's hands trembled around the money. "Miss, I don't know how to thank you." His voice was thick with emotion. Claire managed a small, reassuring smile. "Just promise me one thing," she said softly. He blinked. "Take care of yourself." For a long moment, the veteran didn't move. Then, his shoulders shook slightly. A single tear slipped down his cheek. He nodded. "I will." 6 minutes and 46 seconds. Claire barely had time to process what had happened before a sharp voice cut through the moment like a blade. "You gave away what?" Claire stiffened. She turned slowly to see her co-worker, Megan, standing in the store entrance, arms crossed. Megan had just gotten off her shift, still in her diner uniform. But instead of admiration, her expression was one of disbelief. "Tell me you didn't just do that," Megan said, stepping closer. Claire clenched her jaw. "I know what it was." "Then why?" "Because he needed it." Megan let out a dry laugh. "You don't even know if he's telling the truth. He could take that money and spend it on booze for all you know." Claire's hands curled into fists. "That's not the point." Megan scoffed. "Unbelievable. You're the one who's going to be out on the street next week, not him." Claire looked away. Had she made a mistake? No. No, she hadn't. But her stomach twisted anyway. She had no plan. No backup. No way of explaining this when her landlord came knocking. Megan sighed and threw up her hands. "Whatever. Just don't come crying to me when you can't pay rent." She spun on her heel and walked out. Claire stood there, the weight of reality pressing down on her. Her bank account was empty. Her rent was due in 5 days. And she had no idea how she was going to fix this. She turned to leave. And saw the young man in the baseball cap still watching her. He gave her a knowing smile. And walked out. Claire had no idea that in that moment, her life had already begun to change. Claire stepped out into the night, the cold air biting at her skin. Megan's words echoed in her mind, each one tightening the knot in her stomach. "You're the one who's going to be out on the street next week." She exhaled sharply, pushing the thought away. She had made her choice. As she turned the corner, she caught sight of the veteran. He stood under the dim glow of a street lamp, staring at the bills in his hand like they might disappear if he blinked. Then, slowly, he folded them with careful precision and slipped them into his coat. He looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, one filled with gratitude deeper than words could express. Claire nodded back, then turned and kept walking. She had done the right thing. Even if it cost her everything. The next morning, Claire sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice pinned to her fridge. Her landlord had given her a 5-day warning last month. 5 days. She had planned everything so carefully. Every dollar was accounted for, until last night. Now, she was broke. And rent was still due. She closed her eyes, rubbing her temples. There had to be a way to fix this. A second job? No, she was already pulling doubles at the diner. Alone? Not likely. She had no credit to speak of. Her fingers drummed anxiously against the table. Then, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it, half expecting another bill reminder. Instead, it was a notification. At local news now, viral story, Waitress gives away life savings to veteran in need. Stranger captures the moment. Claire's heart stopped. She clicked the link. And there she was. A grainy video, taken from the convenience store, showing her pressing the money into the veteran's hand. The headline blared across the top in bold letters. Young woman's selfless act sparks outpouring of support. Her stomach flipped as she scrolled. There were hundreds, no, thousands, of comments. At user 1, this is what humanity is about. We need more people like her. At user 2, if anyone knows who she is, drop her Venmo. We have to help her. Claire's hands trembled. Then, another notification. And another. Her phone vibrated in a steady rhythm as messages poured in. Donations. People were sending her money. She barely had time to process it when a knock sounded at her door. Her chest tightened. The landlord? She rushed to open it. Instead, she found Megan, arms crossed, brow furrowed. Have you seen this? Megan shoved her phone toward Claire's face. The same viral video played on the screen. Claire nodded wordlessly. Megan exhaled, shaking her head. You have no idea what you just did. Claire frowned. Megan cut her off. No, seriously. You're all over the internet. News sites, Twitter, even TV. People are calling you a hero. Claire swallowed. I didn't do it for attention. Megan's expression softened. I know. That's why they love you. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. Here? Claire blinked. What is this? Megan shrugged. Tips from the staff. We saw the video. Figured you could use the help. Claire hesitated. But you said. Megan sighed, running a hand through her hair. Yeah, I know what I said. But I was wrong. Claire's throat tightened. She took the envelope, feeling its weight. Maybe she wasn't alone in this after all. By that evening, Claire's phone had completely shut down from the flood of notifications. She sat on her couch, staring at the screen, unable to believe what was happening. A crowdfunding page had been set up in her name. The goal? $5,000. The current total? $42,317. Claire's breath hitched. Her rent. Her bills. Her entire financial future changed in a matter of hours. A message popped up from an unknown number. Unknown, you changed my life. Please let me return the favor. She knew exactly who it was. The veteran. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, finally, she typed back. Claire, you already did. As she lay in bed that night, Claire stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. $1,000 had nearly ruined her. And yet, it had saved her. Not just her, but him. And maybe, just maybe, more people than she would ever know. She had no idea where life would take her next. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. The next morning, Claire woke to sunlight streaming through her curtains and the distant hum of the city outside. For a moment, she lay there, blinking at the ceiling, unsure if everything from the night before had been real. Then her phone buzzed. She hesitated before picking it up. Her lock screen was flooded with notifications, messages, missed calls, social media tags. Her story hadn't just gone viral. It had exploded. Claire scrolled through the updates, her heart racing. The fundraiser had surpassed $100,000. People from all over the country were sharing her story. Celebrities, news anchors, even politicians. Some called her an inspiration. Others wanted interviews. She had gone from an overworked, struggling waitress to someone the world was watching. It didn't feel real. Then, another message popped up, from an unknown number. Unknown, Claire, this is James Calloway from Channel 7 News. We'd love to feature your story. Let us know if you're interested. She stared at the text, her stomach twisting. Was she ready for this? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She sighed, running a hand through her hair before opening it. Her landlord, Mr. Ellis, stood on the doorstep, his usual stern expression in place. Claire braced herself. But instead of a warning about overdue rent, he held up his phone. I saw the news, he said. Claire nodded, unsure of where this was going. Mr. Ellis shifted awkwardly. Listen. I know I gave you that 5-day warning, but, he exhaled. You don't have to worry about rent this month. Take your time. Claire blinked. What? He shrugged. Seems like the world's looking out for you. For the first time since moving in, Claire saw something in his face she hadn't expected. Kindness. As soon as he left, Claire sank onto her couch, her thoughts spinning. Less than 48 hours ago, she had been on the edge of losing everything. Now? She had enough money to pay off months of rent. To cover her bills. To breathe. And yet, that wasn't what mattered most. She thought about the veteran. The look on his face when she had handed him the money. The way his voice had wavered with disbelief. That moment had changed something in her. This wasn't just about her anymore. She had a platform now. A voice. And for the first time, she wondered. What if I can do more? Claire spent the rest of the day sifting through messages. There were interview requests, sponsorship offers, even job opportunities. One message stood out. At Veteran Support Fund, Claire, we saw your story and were deeply moved. If you're interested, we'd love to partner with you to help more veterans in need. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just about one act of kindness anymore. It was about what came next. That evening, Claire sat on her balcony, phone in hand, staring at the city lights. She had a decision to make. She could take the money, pay off her debts, and quietly return to her normal life. Or she could use this moment to create something bigger than herself. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then, with a deep breath, she opened Twitter and began to type. Claire, I never expected this to happen. I never wanted attention. I just did what I thought was right. Claire, but now I see something bigger. So many people need help. And if my story can make a difference, I want to be part of that change. Claire, stay tuned. We're just getting started. The post went viral in minutes. People flooded her replies with encouragement, support, and ideas. She wasn't just a viral moment anymore. She was a movement. And for the first time in her life, Claire knew. This was only the beginning. Claire barely slept that night. Her mind raced with possibilities. By morning, her post had gained even more traction. Major news outlets were covering her story. Donations to the Veterans fundraiser had surpassed $250,000. And then, her phone rang. The caller ID read, Richard Dawson. Her heart skipped a beat. Richard Dawson was a billionaire philanthropist known for supporting veterans' causes. She hesitated, then answered. Hello? Claire, a deep voice replied. I saw what you did. And I want to help. Claire sat up, gripping the phone. Help how? Richard chuckled. Let's start with lunch. I have a proposal for you. She swallowed hard. Was this really happening? Sure. Good, Richard said. I'll have my assistant send the details. Looking forward to it, Claire. The call ended. Claire stared at the screen. She was about to meet one of the most influential people in the country. What had she gotten herself into? Later that afternoon, Claire found herself sitting in a sleek, upscale restaurant, far from the diner where she worked. Richard Dawson arrived exactly on time. Tall, silver-haired, and confident, he sat across from her with a knowing smile. "You have no idea how big this is, do you?" he asked. Claire shook her head. "I just wanted to help someone." "And that," Richard said, "is exactly why people are drawn to you." As they talked, Richard laid out his proposal. "I want to start a foundation," he said. "One that helps veterans get medical care, housing, and support. And I want you to be part of it." Claire blinked. "Me? You have a gift," he said. "People believe in you. You're authentic. We need that." It was overwhelming. Just days ago, she was scraping by. Now, she was being offered the chance to change lives. But was she ready? By the time lunch ended, Claire knew her answer. She wasn't going back to the diner. She wasn't just going to take the moment. She was going to make something out of it. She shook Richard's hand. "I'm in." He grinned. "Then let's get to work." Over the next few weeks, Claire's life transformed. She worked with lawyers, advisors, and veteran organizations. She appeared on talk shows, spoke at events, met families who had been struggling in silence. Her foundation, Heroes First, launched with a staggering $5 million in donations. She had gone from waitress to leader of a national movement. But the biggest moment was yet to come. One day, Claire received a letter. Handwritten. Simple. She recognized the shaky handwriting immediately. It was from him. The veteran. Claire sat down and unfolded the letter. "Claire, I don't know if you even remember me. But I wanted you to know, you saved my life. Because of you, I got the medicine I needed. But more than that, you gave me hope again. I've spent years feeling forgotten. But that night, someone finally saw me. I used part of the donation to get back on my feet. I have a small apartment now. A place to call home. I even reconnected with my daughter. We hadn't spoken in years. I just wanted to say, thank you. Sincerely. Walter Hensley." Tears blurred Claire's vision as she read the letter. This was why she had done it. Not for the fame. Not for the money. But for people like Walter. For the ones the world had forgotten. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and grabbed her phone. She had more work to do. Because this was just the beginning. Months passed. Heroes First expanded. More veterans received help. More families were reunited. Claire was no longer just a viral story. She was a force for change. She had found her purpose. And it all started with one choice. One act of kindness. Because sometimes, changing one life can change the world. Claire's story is a powerful reminder that one small act of kindness can change a life. Now, let me ask you. What would you have done in Claire's situation? Would you have stepped forward, despite your own struggles? Would you have made the same sacrifice to help a stranger in need? Or would you have walked away, thinking it wasn't your problem? The truth is, we all have moments in life where we can choose to make a difference. The question is, will you? Maybe today, you won't be faced with a choice like Claire's. But somewhere, someone needs help. It could be a struggling neighbor, a friend in crisis, or even a stranger who just needs a little kindness. So ask yourself, how can you make a difference today? Because the world doesn't change through grand gestures. It changes when ordinary people choose to do something extraordinary. And with that, we come to the end of this story. If you were moved by this, don't just keep it to yourself, share it with others. And if you want to hear more inspiring stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness is always worth it. See you in the next story.